because I tell you, and it will be the parting words, I don't see out there in the political landscape any other party or coalition of parties that can deliver any better. In fact, I mean, look at who's been just elected mayor of Johannesburg. I don't know the guy, but I saw an interview of the guy on Newsroom Africa yesterday. And I mean, that was, Jesus, they really haven't understood what the country needs. I mean, it's from the fire to the pan, or the pan to the fire.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good day, hello, good evening, wherever you are watching this from. This is Solin from WorldView again. This morning, I'm going to have a conversation with an economist, Claude de Baissac from Eunomix. He's been saying stuff to South Africa for years, writing, talking, recording himself, putting it out there for those who could listen, and nobody seems to be listening. Look at the train keeps going into the same direction over and over again. So, Claude, I mean, tell us a little bit about what you do, your background. And first of all, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. I know that we've been trying to have this conversation for a while, but it is now we have an opportunity to hear it from your perspective. And also, maybe we'll talk about the World Economic Forum and some of the comments that have been made about South Africa being ready for business. Are we ready for business? All of that. But tell us about Claude de Baissac first. I know you're from Mauritius. You were born in Mauritius.
Well, it's firstly, it's wonderful to be here, Stoli. It's been a long time we've been talking about having a conversation. So I'm very honored. I must say I have the greatest respect and admiration for you and for what you do. I think South Africa needs a lot more voices like yours, but also it needs to embrace them more fully. But I'm sure we'll come back to that particular matter. I have a bit of a strange personal history. I actually was born in Libya, and I was born in Libya during the revolution. I literally was born, I think, 15 days after Gaddafi took power. And maybe that kind of defined my life orientation, this kind of passion for the relationship between human-created chaos and order, and in fact that's what Eunomics means. You can see the name of the company behind me. Eunomics stands for the name of a Greek goddess called Eunomia or Eunomia, and she is one of the lesser known daughters of Zeus, and she's interesting because she stands between utopia and dystopia. Utopia being the ideal world of the intellectual, and you could think about, for instance, the communist utopia as an example, and dystopia, which is obviously chaos and lack of order, which is the very opposite of what, say, the communist.
And what is El Dorado?
Exactly. What is El Dorado? So Eunomics is in between. She's actually, and she's a goddess who doesn't manifest herself in person. She doesn't appear. She doesn't act upon reality. She doesn't talk to humans and play tricks on them like a lot of Greek gods do. No, she comes into the leaders of the city in their dreams. And in their dreams, she tries to counsel them as to how to strike a balance between disorder and too much order, between effectively anarchy and dictatorship. And that kind of is what inspired, well, it's inspiration behind the name, really.
So you said not too much order. You said too much, not too much order. Do we need a little bit of disorder in human societies in order for there to be progress, or for people to have an opportunity to ask themselves if they can do things better?
I think disorder is vital, and I think disorder is a necessary condition of order. If you think about systems theory, and if you think about thermodynamics, this notion of entropy. Disorder is unavoidable. systems, and the more complex systems are, the more they have the tendency and the capacity to lose order. The question isn't the relationship between order and disorder and whether either of them are desirable in absolute terms and forever. The question is, what is their relationship, and how do we live with, and how do we accept the fact that these relationships are cyclical and changing? But Eunomics really is a rejection of both anarchy and the perfect society. You know, one of my favorite self-destroying argument of the communists is always that the reason why the Soviet Union failed is not because the ideology is wrong, but because it was wrongly applied. To which I said, well, then, you know, then we need to talk about Cuba, and we need to talk about China before Deng Xiaoping. And
people say the same thing about BEE. There's nothing wrong with BEE. It's just the way it's applied.
Yeah, and I say, you know, if a societal model fails every time it encounters reality, then clearly that societal model is theoretically flawed. It's the opposite of resilience, right? And that's why I'm a liberal or a social democrat, if you want, is because social democracy is an attempt to reconcile the ideological and the pragmatic in complex societies. And it's not a perfect model, none are. It's really an attempt to try to balance the different forces, the forces of the market, the forces of the state, the forces of individual behavior, the forces of other countries out there, the forces of, you know, a gigantic actor which we've ignored for too long, and which is knocking at our door brutally, or actually usually taking the door of the house with it, which is the ecosystem. So society is very complex.
So what is having grown up? I don't know how long you lived in Libya for. Has there been any philosophical impact on your outlook of life by your experience in Libya?
There have been a number. Yeah, so we were kicked out. My parents were kicked out, and we had to drive. I think the incredible distance, immense distance, you know, baby and all, from Libya to France. And then my mom had to go back to try to get our stuff, and she was incredible. I mean, she still is. Unfortunately, she has Alzheimer's, so she's slowly departing but what is in her case a beautiful dreamland. But she had this incredible moral strength and courage to go back to Libya in the middle of a revolution and to demand from the new Libyan government compensation for breach of contract.
Wow.
Because my father was the head of the French education for the government of Libya. And he's kicked out because he's French, there's a revolution, a military coup, and she goes back there, me being, I think, literally 2 or 3 months old, and she is incarcerated, and she threatened with sexual violence, and she very clearly said to the officer who was telling her, you know, you're very desirable. She says, but you know, sir, you are a good Muslim man, and I'm a married woman and the mother of 4, and I just had a child. I am therefore not pure, and you are a gentleman. But you know, she not only did she get out of jail, but on top of that, she got the government of Libya to compensate the family for the loss of contract. And if I go back to my family's history, you know, I'm named after Claude de Baissac, my great uncle, who was a war hero, and his sister Lise de Baissac. I think there is in my family a very long kind of, and it's not just a tradition. I think it's really more fundamental than that. There is this incredible mix of independence, intellectual independence, a great respect for books and for learning, great curiosity, but also a kind of fearlessness and a like for action, but very much in this kind of social democratic view. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Libya and all those stories, and then experiencing two very different models when I grew up. We then moved to La Réunion, where I grew up, and then my grandparents were in Mauritius. And Mauritius was at the time experiencing civil disturbances after independence, and it was written off as a country that was going to fail. Whereas, and Réunion was kind of an outpost of the French colonial empire, extremely poor at the time we arrived there in the early 70s, extremely neglected. And both of them in the 80s experienced economic integration in the world. They kind of were part of that wave of globalization, and they took two very different paths to development. One within the French fold, receiving massive amount of subsidies, massive amount of state intervention by the French, but completely disconnected with the real productivity of the people. And so mass employment, an enormous welfare state, and gigantic investment in infrastructure.
But I mean, because La Réunion is a département d'outre-mer, it's an overseas department of France, n'est-ce pas?
Yes.
Is it territory de Dom-Tom? Surely what was happening in the government's largesse, as it were, in the Réunion was also repeated in France, in the Hexagon, as they call it.
I mean, you know, when Mitterrand becomes president, suddenly, you know, there's a massive extension of the French welfare state. And but there was a tremendous catch-up to be done with the Outre-mer overseas French departments, which had been long neglected. But the model chosen is simply to indulge these places,
to appease
them socially. Look, there was tremendous poverty when I was a child. I remember it very clearly. And so at the time, they were really kind of survivance of the old monopole colonial, right? They couldn't really trade. Their trade was completely, you know, monopolistic with France. France could impose enormous overtaxes on them. And so it was a highly unequal kind of post-colonial society with no economic activity whatsoever besides sugar. And so the plan was to catch up with France, called you know, bringing back the end in l'inégalité, you know, to the inequalities and the catch-up. But that was done completely artificially. So you never had a commensurate increase in real economic activities, just an explosion in consumerism and construction and infrastructure and standards of living, but still structurally high unemployment and youth unemployment, which leads to occasional flare-ups and explosions because it's untenable. And then 170 kilometers north, you had Mauritius, which was also extremely poor. And had also been neglected by the British Empire, became independent. Contrary to popular belief, independence wasn't gained by Mauritius. In fact, Mauritius refused independence from the Brits. It's one of the few places that said, but look at us, we are small. We are entirely dependent on Britain. And we have a population explosion, which is going to destroy our sustainability. And we have tremendous intercommunal tensions between the Indian majority and the Muslims and Christian minorities. And we have this, you know, this society where there is a very, very small white majority at the top, which controls 90% of the economy.
So independence was forced down their throat, as it were?
Oh, it absolutely was.
But it's very interesting when you say this. I'm thinking about the Comores. The Grand Comore also a number of years ago was beginning a conversation to say maybe we shouldn't be independent because we can't survive with this independence thing. Let's ask France to take us back again. It's quite fascinating.
Yes, I mean that was the most bizarre thing. Yeah, and part of indeed the Comore, even they had a referendum.
Yeah.
Which voted. I think it was 75% voted for the reintegration into France.
It's quite interesting.
which France politely declined. Said,
Of course, it
thanks,
was
but
like
no thanks.
it is going to be another child to feed. I think that's how
Exactly. I
France
mean,
saw it.
this is what a lot of the fantasies of Pan-African anti-neocolonialism, which which is often correct, but often is a caricature.
Right.
I mean, Britain and France and Portugal and Spain, and they don't want their old colonial empires back. That's the last thing they want.
Well, provided they can be relatively self-sufficient, right? They can generate, because a lot of times it's funds. I mean, if you consider, for example, the Department d'Outre-mer versus the Department of France, it must not be given separate treatment to other departments who are based in Europe, in the Hexagon. So
Exactly.
if you have more unemployment there, or you have more people needing government social grants, as it were, because they had the level with their own sense of social grants in those places. They're called RMI. I don't know. RMI doesn't
Oh,
exist
it's
anymore.
massive. I mean, you have tons
Revenue,
and tons and
oui,
tons.
revenu minimum d'insertion. That's what it
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Oh, there's that, and there is family grant, and there is third child grant, and there is free education, and there is
right.
and there is and there is and there is and there is. And then you compare that to Mauritius, where there is none of that,
Mm,
and Mauritius had to figure out a development model for itself.
yeah.
And as a kid, I was crossing the islands
Mm,
constantly. So I was at school in Réunion because that was a French educational system.
mhm.
And then we were on holidays at our grandparents, both islands very poor, but both islands fast integrating the world, and both choosing or being imposed, depending on how you view things, two very different models. And it was fascinating. It was
But isn't
fascinating.
it when you have two children, one is very, very spoiled and everything gets done for them, and the other one grows up in a home where they have to make food, they have to make a plan every day. It's almost like Mauritius was a child who needed to make a plan because nobody was going to take care of them. And the other one was a child who would look up to the hexagon and say, hey, we need more of this, right?
Exactly. And there always has been this kind of, they are like these twin sisters, but they are they are the false twin sisters,
Mm,
and they look at each other both with envy's contempt for what the other has, which the other doesn't have.
right, right.
And the Mauritians look down upon the Réunionnais as being assisted, i.e., dependent on the state,
Mm,
and therefore there is contempt because Mauritians have made themselves up.
mm,
And then the Réunionnais look down upon Mauritius as being, well, effectively not French, not part of the EU, and having a standard of living which is vastly inferior.
mm.
And so, to some extent, I mean, the conversation brings us back to South Africa, because in fact, South Africa is a country which would like to be like France, and shares a lot of the government, the ANC, share a lot of the ideologies of the French dominant parties, whichever they are from. The French parties, whether they're from the right or the left, they're all social democratic at the end of the day, but in an unsustainable way. It's not my kind of social democracy. My Canadian, not French, not Italian.
Just a minute. So when did you finally move to
You
South Africa?
and
Before
the unaffordability of that model.
before we do that, when did you finally come to South Africa? What brought you to South Africa?
Sorry, I lost you there a second.
When did you finally make a move to live in South Africa, and what made you go to South Africa?
Right. So for many years, it's been in and out of South Africa. I still have a base in Réunion. I have obviously my base in Mauritius. But what brought me to South Africa was, in fact, a great curiosity and interest in what seemed to be working at the time, which was this kind of Rainbow Nation idea.
What year was
I
it?
had around 2001,
Okay.
2002, 2003 is where I started coming and going.
Mbeki was president.
Mbeki was president. I had come a few times for conferences at the time, and I had been impressed by what I was seeing, and I had thought, well, there is something that could work, which would reconcile a lot of the tensions we spoke about a few minutes ago. And it was interesting because on the one hand, there was very, very positive energy. And on the other hand, there was obviously significant poverty, exclusion, unemployment, and it was rapidly visible, right? And then there was also this very strange situation with Mbeki, who was clearly trying to emulate or channel his inner Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. There was a great sense of a developmental state mission. And there was also, I remember very clearly, an intolerance for questioning his intelligence and questioning how right he was, including on HIV/AIDS and on crime. And there was a really interesting dissonance there. And for me, that's one of the great paradoxes of the Zuma and Mbeki battle, is that in a way, I remember watching SABC, and I remember the news anchor saying, this had been 2004, 2005, oh, and aren't we lucky to have a president like Mbeki, you know? And I thought, well, this just sounds like we are in Rwanda, Thabo knows best.
Except that Thabo didn't kill people and disappear. People disappear. We can't compare it to Rwanda's president. That man needs to be looked at. But that's a discussion for another day. Yeah,
of course. No. But what I'm saying is that this kind of this flawless, perfect genius,
I get you.
Leader who knew everything best. Except he didn't, otherwise he would still have been president after the fiasco of 2007 or something, or he would have chosen a puppet president. But Zuma, when he came, in fact, opened up, I find, and I found the political discourse. I think the first 2 years of Zuma were actually potentially very hopeful in a way. Not necessarily from a policy standpoint. I didn't buy that. No, I didn't buy. No. Just listen to it. Listen, Toli. Be open-minded.
Yeah, of course I am. I just remember him. He went into the presidency running away from the long arm of the law. He was already a criminal on the run.
I know he was.
But okay, I'm listening. I'm open-minded.
But I'm talking about. Speech, right? He opened up the speech by criticizing Mbeki's positions on crime and on the economy, where obviously he was wrong, Zuma was wrong, but by criticizing what had become very stultified orthodoxy. I think he opened up a freedom of expression, which he himself was not then able to put back in the box, and which eventually led to his own demise. And I find that South African media and South African are much more liberated now in speech and in thought than they were at the time I came. And so, and this is what gives me hope in this situation. And we go back to this notion of chaos, order, and disorder, right?
Yeah.
This dialectical relationship between the two.
A question. I mean, when I said earlier, it does. But I want to just pursue this further. I just want to let me just say. Earlier, I said, I mean, he was a criminal suspect because he was already pursued by the law and all that. But the point is, one of the major differences that were made between Mbeki and Zuma is that Mbeki, and you described him well, they often said he had a little kitchen cabinet that he consulted, very tight kitchen cabinet, that he worked with to make major decisions of state. And even people like the COSATU and the South African Communist Party at some point didn't trust him. That's why over time they coalesced around Zuma. Now, Zuma was seen as somebody who is collegial in his decision making, who consults widely and all that. Even I at first thought, it's interesting because maybe, I never liked Zuma, especially because of, how he got in there and what happened before then. But I thought maybe South Africans were tired of a particular style of leadership, of a Mbeki style of leadership. It's especially ANC people, because they're the ones who choose these leaders. And they thought somebody who consults well. Apparently, somebody told me that Mbeki had never had a one-on-one with Zweli Nzimavavi when he was Secretary General of COSATU. That's a big thing. I mean, he's a member who's of the Tripartite Alliance. And Zuma came in and said, okay, we're all going to work together. What do you think about that dynamic?
Yeah, look, Mbeki never met with the leader of the opposition, the official leader of the opposition.
That's true. Tony Leon. That's true.
He never met with was leader of the DA. Zuma, on the other hand, met with Tony Leon and met with Helen Zille, and actually Helen Zille and Zuma had a good relationship. I mean, Zuma even made Tony Leon ambassador to Argentina at some point. There was a gregariousness, and there was, which I think were genuine and corresponded to the personality of Zuma and his style of leadership. What happened to Zuma will always be fascinating to me. I never trusted him. I never thought that he had what it took, and obviously it was known that he was corrupt. Not that he was the only one. I think corruption is in the DNA of the ANC, and the reason why corruption is in the DNA of the ANC is because it was a party in exile that needed to do whatever it needed to do to survive. And so there's always been an element of the rogue in the ANC, which in a way Mbeki tried to take control of and failed. And that is what the Zuma revolution is, the tripartite alliance turning away from Mbeki. For all these reasons, you have to remember Mbeki was in exile. He was in London. He didn't really represent. He didn't have an organic power base in the ANC.
He was close to Oliver Tambo. Apparently, he was a young man who carried his bag. Figuratively, of course.
And which is why Mandela wanted Ramaphosa to succeed him, because he thought that the country needs a leader who is organically connected to the people. And so, funnily enough, Zuma was, but Zuma represented, he represented the best and the worst of populism.
But just a minute, this thing I don't understand. Mbeki should have. Mbeki never wanted Zuma to be president. I mean, if you read Dream Deferred, he's quoted as saying, if this man becomes president, we're going to end up being like Nigeria at the time. He was absolutely not. But why would he make him deputy when he knows that putting anybody in that position will give them the ambition to think they're going to be the next big thing?
Well, I think it was the lack of political acumen of Mbeki and his intellectual arrogance. The sense that he could control Zuma and he could control the ANC, and he could make it go the way he wanted, and again speaks of the distance that he had and kept with the ANC and the country. He was the intellectual, Oxford-educated intellectual in his ivory tower. And so that's one form of hubris, right? Zuma represents another form of hubris. And then what we have in Ramaphosa is not hubris, but simply sheer incompetence. You know.
Is it fear as well in Ramaphosa? Is it? I mean, like people often say he doesn't have backbone. I think that's pretty much the best description of him. Something with he doesn't. We don't. I don't. Nobody knows what he stands for, and he doesn't know how to. It seems like he's forever wanting to be loved by people. Don't you think? He's afraid to call out people that are doing wrong, and anyway, he can't anymore because he's lost the moral high ground himself. He can't. When he points fingers at others, they're going to point other fingers at him for all sorts of stuff that we know and that we don't know.
Yes, absolutely. Look, I don't find Ramaphosa interesting. I found Mbeki interesting. I found Zuma interesting. They were interesting characters, and the arc of their lives were interesting and still are, right? I mean, Mbeki, people missing him and saying, well, we should have listened to him. Zuma still capable of exerting his nefarious influence on the country, like a bad cancer who just won't die, and having the capacity directly or through his people to generate havoc, as we saw in July 2021. Look, obviously, it was not just him; it was also the socio-economic consequences of the pandemic lockdown.
I wanted to talk about the economic policies of South Africa, say over the past 10, 15, 20 years. Where did we go wrong? Can we still, change things around to, especially considering the ongoing power crisis?
Look, the different interpretations and views, right? But I think to simplify it, what we could say is there were three phases in kind of four phases in the ANC's economic policy, economic management, rather than policy, but economic management era. There have been four phases. Phase one is taking power, and without being clear as to whether they're going to go left or they're going to go right or in the middle, and tremendous amount of policy debates within the ANC around DP and gear, ready to govern and all of that. But discovering that the state is broke, government finances are broke, and the pragmatists taking over, particularly, supposedly the theory goes after Mandela had gone to Davos. And, he goes in 91, he says the nationalization is the policy of the ANC, and he hasn't consulted with anyone, speaking of consulting. And then he goes to Davos and he comes back and he says, privatization is the policy of the ANC. And that really shocked the left, and gave great joy to business. But so what you have is this initial phase of discovery that the state finance are crumbled. The economy is in free fall because of the consequences of sanctions and instability. And so the state really needs kind of its own structural adjustment. And that's what Mbeki did. I mean, this is, I think, his greatest gift to the country, was that he effectively restructured the economy, did what normally the World Bank and the IMF do. He managed to do that, and I think not with the purpose of selling out South Africa, contrary to what the communists and the labor unions have said, but on the contrary, as a real economic nationalist, as a real African nationalist.
And it was very clear, to his credit as well, Mbeki's, that when he said, we want to do as much of this on our own without needing to borrow money from the international finance institutions, then we become indebted to them. But this is where we are now under Ramaphosa.
Correct. So he understood that you needed to, in order to be independent and to keep your options open and to keep your economic sovereignty, you needed to balance economic opening and fiscal and budgetary sustainability.
Right.
And he did that, So obviously there were consequences in the sense that initially government couldn't afford to invest massively everywhere, consolidate the finances, open up the economy, internationalize it,
You
benefit
pay
from
off
what
the
was,
old debt
pay off the old
adopted
debt.
from apartheid.
That's right, and really modernize the economy, which was wretched. It was controlled by monopolies that were very, very wide and did everything. I mean, Anglo-American, was in just about every economic activity. Well, because there was, in a limited market, there was, you didn't have opportunities to go up in volume, so you had to go wide in scope.
Right.
So you would end up doing property businesses and banking and food and theme parks and anything, right? So this is an economy that was completely not modern and completely not productive and worked only for, 4 million people, the rest of them being just economic slaves to the majority. So that's phase one, kind of restructuring, stabilizing, opening up. And then stage two is growth, right? It's kind of liftoff that happens around 1998. Goes down in 2001 because of the global financial troubles caused by 9/11. But then, grows to up to 4.6%, 5.6%. I think
we even had a budget surplus at some point in those years.
Yeah, and I remember very well the FM Financial Mail lead page of the, I think 2007 or 2006. It was a rocket and it said lift off, right? And at that time, growth was 3.5 times, the population growth rate. So that's stage two, right? Lift off, and living standards were rising, and government was bringing services to those who never had them. There was a tremendous amount of
beginning of growth of the black middle class as well.
Yeah, the rise of the black middle class, the rise of BE, and all of that. And so the beginning of transformation, because when the economic growth rises to a certain level, it lifts all boats, and it does. I mean, people who say it doesn't, it's horseshit. There is evidence globally that it does. How much it does and whether it does equally lift all the boats is a question. And that's why you have compensatory mechanism like welfare, subsidies, etc. Well, that's where the government needs to come in to correct the inequality in the growth of the revenues of everybody, and ensure that it's sustainable.
But just a minute, I don't know if it was during that takeoff or soon after that, people like Osatu and the communists came up and they were very angry at Trevor Manuel and Beck because they said, well, all that money that you're making, you should be giving it to us, you should be spending on us. And they were like, no, there's gotta be some discipline here. Do you remember that part? Yeah, well, absolutely. So there was a fudge, right? And there was a fudge that in fact was very dangerous and has now resulted in this zero growth situation we're in, which means negative growth in GDP per capita because, well, population growth is greater than economic growth, and it's been the case for now about 5 years. Right. So there was a fudge, right? So Mbeki wasn't a liberal, he wasn't a capitalist, he wasn't, he was a leftist, and he was what you call a Fabian socialist. Fabian socialist.
Tradition. Did
you say a Fabian socialist?
Yeah, the Fabians. Yeah, Fabian.
Okay.
So which is that the state must guide the market and create equalizing through healthcare and education, and so he very much was one who was a Fabian socialist. So you need to work with the market, and so and he was clearly an economic nationalist. There's no doubt about that. But was look, the left was angry that they had been sidelined from a macroeconomic policy standpoint in 1993, 94, 95. And they jumped on Zuma, as a convenient Trojan horse to bring in their policies. But Zuma had the last laugh. They thought they were using Zuma, and Zuma used them.
True.
And
so was it phase 3 when Zuma arrived?
Yeah, so so Zuma tells them whatever he wants to tell them to get them on site at Polokwane, and he says, well, we're going to do a national development plan and it's a very useful way to take all the opponents of his policies and put them in a useless place called the National Development Commission. Say, think about the long-term strategy for South Africa, right, my brothers, while I rape and pillage the countries, and everybody falls for this, and I certainly didn't. I wrote a first piece in 2009 called "Wither the Rainbow Nation," where I create three scenarios, and I said the most likely is that we are going to experience a progressive decline in state capacity and economic dislocation.
What were the early signs for you of this forecast of a decline? What were the first two?
Well, it was so it was the policy platform of Polokwane, 2007. It made no sense. It was the moral character of Zuma, which obviously clearly was flawed to anyone who had studied the guy. It was the evidence of the acceleration of corruption scandals in the public sector and the private sector. It was the acceleration of cadre deployment, which was destroying state capacity. And obviously, it was the first onset of load shedding, late 2007, which clearly, demonstrated that even Mbeki, with his great intelligence and his great capacity to get things done, had failed to make a decision between privatizing Eskom or keeping it as a state monopoly, but had chosen this absurd system for which we still pay the price, which is to have the monopoly producer, which doesn't receive any investment from its only shareholder. I mean, who in the world does that, right?
Yeah,
and at the same time, an independent market regulator who regulates the prices of the sole provider. The worst of both worlds.
But Mbeki was warned. I mean, he did apologize a lot, much later after he left power. He was warned that South Africa would need more generating capacity for electricity. And do you think he looked at Eskom and he said, "No, we're good. We don't need anything"? Or was it just being like, don't tell me what to do? I mean, later on, it became very clear.
So I think really there was the creation of NERSA corresponded with the decision to create independent power producers, and NERSA would effectively adjudicate prices and competition. So Eskom would remain a buying monopoly, and the prices would be set by an independent authority. So Eskom could not abuse its market position. But what is the point of having a state monopoly if that state monopoly is not developmental, i.e. doesn't practice developmental prices? Then you need to have the market, because obviously then the market will introduce competition, and with a proper regulator, that competition will stop oligopolistic behavior or duopolistic behavior concentration, and then lead to, and it will make sure that we get electricity at a suitable price with the consistency and the quality needed. Here we have nothing. Now, back to Mbeki, why he didn't make that position, I don't know. Why was liberalization not completed? I suspect it's because, fundamentally, we have to go back to Mbeki. He was not a liberal. He did not trust the private sector. I mean, the private sector used to complain that they would never meet with him. He wouldn't meet with them. He wouldn't talk to them. He saw the private sector as in service to the state and to the ANC, and so he wanted to maintain a state monopoly in the person of Eskom, but again, this is the ANC has never resolved. Is it wants to be everything to everyone at all time. And so we want to be a developmental state, i.e., we want the state to play a leading role in economic development and growth. But that requires that government budget, directly or indirectly, puts 25, 30% of its money year after year after year for 20, 30 years into infrastructure,
Right.
which it doesn't, right? But it maintains monopoly, which means that the users, the consumers, have to pay non-developmental price, I mean, growth-killing price, anti-developmental price, usury prices, monopolistic abuse price, the worst of capitalist concentration price. I mean, you know, kind of, it's like the 1920s in the US, right? Kind of prices, right?
But I mean, the ANC
owned by government.
Right.
They want everything. And then they want a welfare state, right? And they want private investment. And but you know, it's so, as I said in the paper that was written, well, you know, putatively for the presidency, is you can't have your cake and eat it. You have to make choices. And this Mbeki understood, didn't do perfectly, but he certainly did better than Zuma, who really then leads us to phase 3 of our economic
management
dynamics, if you want, history, is this kind of pseudo developmental state project with the left in tow. I mean, very much excited about that. And they get all the economic portfolios and they put, well, I'm going to be polite by calling them loonies and clowns. And they, you know, the minister of the different ministers of public enterprises, which destroy them, the ministers of trade and industry, which have led us to having now manufacturing in GDP, which is lower than the average sub-Saharan African, when it used to be like 25%. And at the same time, this constant battle around the fiscus, the budget, the direction of the budget. And underneath all of that is state capture, Zuma state capture, and the looting of state resources. And so I hold the left tremendously responsible for what happened. They only jumped ship and turned against Zuma, you know, when it became patently obvious. I mean, you know, like unapologetically clear, right?
I beg to differ. The ANC didn't really turn against Zuma. What they did, they realized, just like they realize now ahead of the 2024 elections, that Zuma would probably no longer be their strength if they are to stay in power and in control. So they shifted him to the side. But a lot of people stayed with Zuma in terms of loving him, you know, all the songs about what he has done. Yeah. But the ANC doesn't care about anything except its longevity in power at whatever cost.
Yeah, I agree. You know, in the 2021 long essay we wrote that was published by Daily Maverick, which really looked at the developmental path and performance of South Africa. I mean, you know, I wrote very clearly, because I write the tough sections, the one where you know, I'm not a two-handed economist, right? It's like not on the one hand, on the other hand. This is it. You know, I've been saying South Africa is going down and it's accelerating, and a key cause is policy, and the policies of the ANC are growth destructive, and in the end, they are employment destructive, and they are equality destructive, and they are poverty increasing, simply because they're wrong-headed, and we know this because everywhere that it's been done, it's failed. But it has a vested interest in staying in power, and to some extent, it also has had a vested interest in the destruction of the economy, because its vote has come from the rural poor. And you know, the ANC, at least, you know, Zuma and perhaps a significant portion of Ramaphosa's ANC does not want a wealthy, successful black middle class, urban, who would vote the ANC out.
So who would become a clever black, is it right?
Exactly. I mean,
Do
can
you
you
think
imagine
do
the
you think the
insult of
ANC
that?
the ANC has gradually moved further from it used to be I used to describe it as more like center left, but it looks like it's moving further away from the center, further into the left. Do you see it that way?
No, I don't think so. I think
Mm,
it's nothing. I think it's yeah, it's ideologically now stultified, calcified into leftist ideology and
mm,
incorporate, represented. I think embodied by Guede Montache
mm, mm,
and his ilk. But kind of a statist, dirigist, hardcore.
mm,
Um, um, I don't know. I mean, 1950s Soviet Union communists,
mm,
but also a lot of them policy entrepreneurs,
mm.
statists, because if you are statist, it means you control the resource of the state, and therefore
Right.
that gives
Rent
opportunity
seekers.
for
Right.
corruption.
Yeah.
But I don't think a real fundamental policy and ideology are of any interest to most of these guys.
Claude,
As you said, power for
Claude,
power's sake, is it?
yeah. Claude, we have about 5 minutes, unfortunately, to complete
Yeah.
this interview. Yeah. But I need you to go into stage 4 and tell us what you think is going to happen.
So, what stage 4 is the chicken coming home to roost. Stage 4 is economic collapse, which
Mm,
is 2015 really is the year where you can see that stage 4 beginning in the sense that GDP per capita started to decline,
mm,
and the growth rate, never really went above 2%.
right.
And so stage 4 is when economic decline became structural, and when unless there are fundamental changes to policy and to implementation immediately since 2015, right?
Mm, mm,
You would end up with a collapsing economy and disinvestment and massive increase in poverty, unemployment, inequality, and coming with that, eventually, a sovereign debt crisis, which I think we are very close to. And we're very close to it because Treasury's growth forecasts are always wrong by an incredible 1.2 percentage points per annum, which means that if they tell you it's going to grow by 1.2%, it will grow at zero. And SARB just issued now a new growth forecast, which corresponds, funnily enough, to our own,
mm.
which is basically there's no growth to be had, and significantly lower than Treasury's forecast. And
What do you
that's
think of Godongwana? Is he heavyweight? Does it inspire you? Godongwana, the finance
no,
minister.
no. And I mean, I like, kind of personal basis, and
Mm,
we get along and we occasionally talk, because then he calls me to tells me, you are, blah, blah, blah. And
right.
then I raise the finger back. I said, well,
Mhm.
you want to spar? Let's spar. Because I tell him his forecasts are wrong, and that's not going to work.
Mm,
But the problem is a minister of finance in a
mm,
government like the one we have, and the government that we had with when Gordon was and then Nene was, is that you are simply managing decline, because
mm,
growth policy does not sit in the treasury. Growth policy, sits in small business department and
mm,
trade and industry and
mm.
telecommunications and
Yeah, but
state-owned
that's
enterprises.
where it gets to be rolled out. I mean, at some point, policy making happens elsewhere, and it's
But the
informed.
problem is that there is no central policy making.
Mm,
The presidency should be acting as some sort of a super ministry of
mm,
economy, and that actually issues the policy and then gives the marching orders to the departments.
right.
And it's aligned with the treasury, right?
Mm,
So
mm,
treasury balances the books, or tries to balance the books, and
mm,
then But that doesn't work. And this is the key problem. I mean, the fundamental problem, you asked me about policy ideology, I say there's none. But the fundamental problem is that you have a complete disconnect between the portfolio ministries, which are usually occupied by hacks, ideologues, incompetent, and the fools.
There's no sense of coordination at the high level.
There's none, and everybody does their own thing, and there's no capacity, and it's hyper politicized. And Treasury just try to cobble all of these things together to try to give means and resources to departments who are just rogue. You know, I mean, I said that in the paper that was released, recently, and which led to this Rob Rose editorial in Financial Mail. You know, it's a government of rogues. But
they don't seem to care, Claude. I mean, how many times do people, you, me, others, call them out to say this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong? They don't seem to care. They seem to be in cloud in planet Zuma or planet ANC with all Israel. It is a fire. You know what they used to say in France with François Mitterrand? They used to say he's a Dieu, he's living up in there. He doesn't. There's him and there's a cloud. He doesn't see the ground level. It looks like the ANC has become that way.
Yeah, but I mean, how not to? It's been in power for how long? It's been in power for too long. I mean,
but that's what happens when
absolute powers corrupt absolutely. And but my fear is that there is no real alternative, and that's why I wrote that piece, because my piece is in fact a kind of it's a message to the president and the ANC. It says, dudes, you have about 15 months before, and you are going to be wiped out. Now maybe you don't have a clue, and maybe you don't care, but I mean, surely you should care about not lose by too bad, so you can still be part of the next stage. And that means that you should be doing something. And this is a plan for doing something over 15 months. I mean, you know, appealing to their perhaps sense of self-preservation. But
the ANC would stay in power to preserve the ANC, not for something. They will do everything to keep holding on. I don't think that South Africa, you know what, and this is a mistake we make a lot of times. We tend to talk about South Africa from the perspective of the African National Congress. We should talk about South Africa from the perspective of South Africa, the constitution, the people, what we signed up for. And we shouldn't have to rely on whether the ANC is there. Actually, the ANC must go for South Africa to stay.
I'll tell you something. I'll tell you my view on this. All right. Yeah. This is the Titanic and it's sinking. Okay. All right. I have one captain aboard the Titanic right now, and I'm not going to change my captain. You know, Ramaphosa is president of the country. The ANC has a parliamentary majority, and they have 15 months to
sure.
Completely tanking.
Yeah,
and that's where we are. That's where we are. You know, with the load shedding we are in, the economic crisis we are in. I mean, just let's project 15 months or 18 months from now where South Africa is going to be if things continue on path. We're going to be at -1%, -2% growth. We're going to have people on the streets. We're going to have no electricity. We're going to have an absolute catastrophe. And that's why I say, I'm talking to the captain. Captain, oh, my captain, right?
But the thing is, you see, even if Godongwana or even Ramaphosa were to listen to you, the thing is, they have what they call the policy conference of the ANC, which we don't know what it does. Those 40 or 400 or 4,000 people make decisions for the Republic of South Africa, and then they appoint people or elect people to go and implement those decisions. So they can't change policy. Policy is already made by the 4,000 people. Exactly.
That is bullshit. Exactly. No. What you're saying is bullshit, because you know when Zuma wanted to do things, he did things. When Mbeki wanted to do things, he did things. Okay. When Mandela wanted to do things, he did things. You know, the president has been re-elected. I mean, Ramaphosa has just been re-elected by the ANC. Okay. He has an opportunity to do something, show his mettle now, or be out and be, you know.
So it's just not the right person. So it's just, okay, I get you. So basically,
you know, it's like you get 15 months, you're the president, you tell the ANC, you're the president of the ANC, you say to the ANC, yes, we have a broad policy direction, but you know what? That's for the singing tomorrows of post-2024, because we are going to lose. And we're going to lose because the country is sinking.
What do you think of Mashatile?
Cabinet.
Yeah, but okay. I mean, on that line, talk about Mashatile. Mashatile is coming in deputy president. Do you think he will because the guy who's living now, David Mabuza, I don't know, he was most of the time in Russia or taking care of whatever business he's taking care of, and now Mashatile is coming on. But Mashatile definitely wants to be president of the Republic of South Africa. He wants the ANC to stay in power, and for the ANC to stay in power, it must give something to the people of South Africa who believe they can still give it more chance.
Well,
do you think he will strengthen Ramaphosa? Do you think Mashatile will strengthen?
There is an idea for you. Yeah. Get Ramaphosa to make Paul Mashatile, a kind of an acting prime minister over the next 15 months.
Like Mandela did with Mbeki.
That's right, with a very small super cabinet, with a very powerful Ministry of Finance, a very powerful Ministry of Economy, that brings all of these things together. That's the essence of my proposal. 5 or 6 super ministries, and with very clear achievable targets. What's stopping this from happening? What's stopping that from happening? Okay, very practical actions, what I called effectively, a strategy of 1,000 small steps to save South Africa, and then maybe give the ANC an opportunity to remain a player in the political field in 2024. Because I tell you, and it will be the parting words, I don't see out there in the political landscape any other party or coalition of parties that can deliver any better. In fact, look at who's been just elected mayor of Johannesburg. I don't know the guy, but I saw an interview of the guy on Newsroom Africa yesterday. And that was, Jesus, they really haven't understood what the country needs. It's from the fire to the pan, or the pan to the fire.
Yeah, but look,
what is going on?
Yeah, they're going to kick him out soon. The ANC didn't fight so much to remove the DA to put some young dude called the Jamal Party, whatever they call him.
He has no idea what he's talking about.
He's just a placeholder. I can tell you that.
Yeah, he's a placeholder, but that's a problem with coalition politics, right? Yeah. So we have the ANC. We have. Hopefully, they read the writing on the wall and they decide to do a few urgent things right now, which won't save the country and deliver, anything, but it will stop the decline. That's what we need.
Okay.
And then maybe 2024, there is time to organize for 2024 some sort of a new crisis government, partnership between the ANC and the reasonable rational parties to create a common platform that appeals to South Africa's aspiration for peace, stability, the promise stolen, and which delivers growth, development, and transformation in a democratic environment. And I think that's what we need. We need the best people of the best parties to create something new.
Ok, on those words, mon cher ami, j'espère qu'il y aura d'autres occasions pour discuter, faire continuer cette discussion et d'autres discussions sur l'Afrique du Sud, parce qu'il y en a tellement. But we can't talk about it all in one conversation. So we'll do it again. I'm really excited that you came on board, that we finally managed to make this time, and I'm sure that we'll do it again. Claude de Baissac of Eunomics. Thank you very much. We'll also have that conversation about the goddess, Eunomix, because we didn't really take it far enough, because I'm fascinated. À la prochaine.
Thank you. À la bientôt. Au revoir.
Merci. Bye-bye. Bye. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you are, the Solim Weng at WorldView with Claude de Baissac and Eunomics. It was a really fascinating conversation. At least I found it way. And I hope that if you stayed up to now, it's because you love these conversations. I would like you to please continue sharing them and subscribing to our platform, WorldView. And of course, for those of you who would like to advertise on this platform, please write to us at info@world-view.co. info@world-view.co. Thank you very much. See you next time.